Good morning. Today on Spotlight, celebrating National Hispanic Heritage Month. We'll pay tribute to the generations of Hispanic Americans who have positively influenced and enriched our nation, state, city, and society. What began as a week-long celebration in 1968 under then-President Lyndon Johnson was expanded to a month 20 years later by President Ronald Reagan. Today, we'll take a deep dive into this culture with Dr. Raina Esquivel-King, an assistant professor of history in Wayne State University's Center for Latino, Latina, and Latin America Studies. It's Sunday, October the 13th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. And welcome to Spotlight. Dr. Esquivel-King, thank you so much for joining us today. You're doing well?
I am doing very well. Thank you so much for having me here today.
It's certainly our pleasure. This is a big topic, but an interesting one. September 15th through October 15th is National Hispanic Heritage Month. And it's getting a lot of attention. I think a little more each year, but certainly everybody knows about it now. But it hasn't always been that way, correct?
No, it has not. Lyndon B. Johnson is the first one that recognized Hispanic Heritage Week. So it was only a week long, and then this was changed under Ronald Reagan in 1988 to include the whole month. So yes, this has definitely not been a thing for a while. I mean, 68 is still relatively, new, right?
Right.
It's close in modern times, right? Modern times.
Depending on how old you are, right?
Yeah, that's true. I guess, showing my age here. But yes, it's not super long ago. So it's rather new, and it's definitely taken off. I would say, especially in the last decade, I feel like a lot more attention has been paid to it, and people are embracing it. Cities like Detroit and things like that are embracing it and putting on festivals and events that we can share our culture.
What would you say is the benefit of having a designated month every year for a particular culture, and why is that important to the overall landscape and mosaic of America?
In traditional American history, a lot of these political, social actors have been cut out. So women,
ignored.
Yeah, or ignored. Women, minorities, they've not really been integrated into our history, and we're doing a better job at it now, but we need these months so that way we can step back and recognize the contributions of others to our society. And so I think that links to your other question, is why it's important for the mosaic or for culture. And if you're informed about the other people you live with in a city, about their culture, about your differences, you're going to be a lot more empathetic to their plight. And so when
it's about getting to know something that maybe you didn't know anything about, and rather than falling into stereotypes, get in there, learn, talk with them, and then you may come out much more better educated.
It goes in several different ways. For the culture itself, for us to be more understanding to each other's plights, and that can help us also understand the political situation of which is tied to like immigration. So all those stereotypes that we've been hearing about, they're not true. And if you immerse yourself in this culture, you can learn more about them and see the heart of that culture.
Professor, let me ask you a question which I gotta believe you get. Maybe it's from the students or maybe it's from adults. And that is, what is the difference between Hispanic and Latino, Latina?
That's a good question. So Hispanic really talks about the larger Hispanic world, or the Spanish-speaking world, so including most of South America, Central America, Mexico. So it's mostly encompassing that. Whereas Latino or Latinx has definitely been a term that people in the States tend to use as an identifier. So because I live in the States, I'm part of U.S. culture, I'm going to call myself more Latinx than maybe Hispanic, because I grew up here, and I'm definitely a Mexican American as opposed to somebody that grew up in Mexico, obviously. So that is the difference between the two terms, how I would use them. But yes, that's a good question, because we get that a lot. And I would like to add too that some of these other terms, like I'm sure you've heard of Chicana or Chicano, yes, right? Those reference a specific ethnicity of Hispanic. So Chicano and Chicana means Mexicans. it's a Mexican movement, as opposed to, you wouldn't call a Puerto Rican the Chicano. It would be, you know, it's not their term. The Mexican Americans have taken up that term. So I do want to tell people about all the different nuances, and our culture is so vast, and it varies.
And,
you know?
and it explains the diversity within that culture, even though oftentimes people will try to take a particular culture and lump everybody in the same thing. Say, well, if they speak Spanish, then they all have the same past heritage, and not true.
No, it's not true at all. Each of these countries had different paths to independence. They had different leaders. They all took up nation building in very different ways, and they conceptualized race in different ways. And so to put our binary from the U.S. on these people just won't work. Because it's just so much more diverse than that, and it's more complicated than that. So, yeah.
All right, we're going to take a little break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the contributions that Americans should be aware of that fit very much into the culture. I want to talk about this center that you're very involved in at Wayne State University, and whatever else we can squeeze in. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back to Spotlight. Doctor, the population for the Hispanic American culture is growing by leaps and bounds. It's a large, quote unquote, minority, and over time, the minorities in this country are predicted to be the majority. Talk about that and the impact and the influence that is having on everything, whether it's education, it's food, it's politics, it's all of the above, because it's so integrated into our society now.
It is, and I mean, we can definitely see that here in Detroit as an example, because Southwest Detroit is, I think, 76% Hispanic or Latino descent. That's a huge portion of Southwest Detroit.
And it's a vibrant community. Last time I checked, I think it's the fastest growing neighborhood in the city of Detroit. It is.
It's a wonderful neighborhood, and you can definitely see their influences from their own countries in the murals. The beautiful murals that are done all over Southwest Detroit are just wonderful examples of how we see this transnational culture, because we see a lot of symbols from the Mexican Revolution in artwork here in Southwest Detroit, which is so great. I think it's such a great fusion of cultures, and people should learn about that. So we definitely have impacts just going on to the street art. But then, of course, we have food. I mean, so many.
Oh my God, there's so many restaurants.
Right? So many Mexican restaurants. I would love to see more integration of like Argentinian, South American restaurants too. I mean, I love the food. That's one of my big things about our culture is we have fantastic food that everyone should try. So not during Hispanic Heritage Month, but you should try it.
Right. Well, I'll tell you a little something. My wife and I went to take a tour of the Michigan Central Station a month or so back. Went down on a Friday evening, and after that we said, well, we're so close to Mexican Town, let's just go over Mexican Town. And we had this huge debate about where we wanted to go eat, because we came up with all these different choices. And it's like, well, we've been there before, we haven't been there, we've been here before, we haven't been there. Let's try something new. So, and it was nice to know that we had so many choices, and it was fun.
Yeah. And the community does a lot too to raise awareness for Hispanic Heritage Month. They do the Run of the Dead is actually going to be Saturday from 7 till 12. And so, because Day of the Dead is it's a holiday that Mexicans celebrate. I do want to be clear about that it's mostly celebrated in Mexico. So another reason to add to Hispanic Heritage Month. It's a little after, but still part of the culture.
Part of the whole process. Now let's talk about this center at Wayne State University that you teach in, because you teach both in the history department, but you also teach in the Hispanic Center there, correct?
Yes, yes, I do. So the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies at Wayne was founded in 1971 out of that movement of the Chicano, Hispanic, Latino power movement that we see with several other minorities coming in the 60s and 70s. We still have very many connections to the alumni that started the center. Some of the alumni teach in the center. I mean, it's so great, the community connection that we have and our connection to the past. I love being able to tell students, this person that taught here is why we have a center. These are the people at the ground to show you that people can get together, do a good job, and good things can come of it. The center is so great and vibrant, and it's grown so much at Wayne. In fact, we've earned the Learning Community Center Awards, which means our Learning Center has helped students actually graduate at higher rates than other students around campus. So we put a lot of investment into not just the Hispanic community, it's open to anybody can join our center if you'd love to learn more about our culture and you want to embrace it and be part of it. We're open to that.
Is it a good way for people, just the general public, to come in and learn about the contributions that the Latino and Hispanic American culture have contributed to us?
Yes, yes, it is, because we do special events highlighting certain things and contributions that have been made. One of the things we have is the DIA has the ofrenda exhibit, and there you will be able to see ofrendas built to people from the past, including like Frida Kahlo. But if you go there, you can find out what people were important to the community. Who did they build ofrendas for? Who do we see as our foundational people? If you go into that exhibit, you can learn, and especially it has a lot of local roots with it.
After you walk past all the Diego
Yes, all the Diego. I mean, it's right. It's such a connection. That too is so such a staple in Detroit. He brought his Mexican art that was created out of this idea of post-revolutionary liberties and power to, you know, the workers, and he did that wonderful mural. So that's a part of Detroit history by a Hispanic that was done.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about yourself and your own heritage and how that fits into this and what you celebrate.
Okay, well, my dad's side came from Guadalajara in the 60s. So my dad came to this country when he was around 6 or 7. So that is where my Hispanic roots come from. My entire family lives out in LA right now, and my dad's side, they're very connected. My grandma hardly speaks any English.
All right.
So you
worked your way here because of Wayne State and the job?
Or I actually grew up in Detroit because my mom's from here. I'm biracial, but my mom is from here, and we ended up moving back to Detroit. My dad moved with us as well, but I still have a lot of roots there because I went back almost every year. We went back to visit family, and I just came from California in July to visit my family, which was wonderful. So as I was living in Detroit, though, it was very different than LA, right? I was always the white person to the Mexicans and the Mexicans to the white people. So it was very hard for me to navigate that world in Detroit. And so I used education as a way for me to understand the world around me. And to, like you said, immerse yourself in these other cultures, learn about things, and try to figure out the way the world works so I can find my place in it.
Yeah.
And so that's how I ended up in doing Latin American studies, and I actually focus on Mexican film and the film industry. Yeah. And so one of my concerns is—
Hang on one second, I got to get a little break in.
Sure.
When we come out, I want to talk about that because I know you have a lot to say about that because that's been your expertise. So before you really get going on that, we're going to slip this in, and then we'll come right back and pick up. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Spotlight. All right, before we went to the break, you were about to tell me about film censorship and all the work that you've done in that area, because that's become an area of great study and expertise for you. Yes. So how does that play into all of this?
Oh, yes. I mean, my research informs my thinking, my politics, the way of the world. And so I'm very excited to talk about how my book ties into larger Hispanic Heritage Month and taking down of negative stereotypes.
Okay, because you are writing a book, right?
Yes.
Or is it already written?
It's finished. It's finished.
Okay.
The manuscript is actually called Lights, Camera, Legitimacy, and the Making of Post-Revolutionary Mexico.
Okay.
And so
And that's going to be published probably through, I think you said maybe the
University of Texas Press is under review. So I'm hoping in the
Longhorn State.
Yeah,
All right.
yes. And so I look at how the Mexican government used film censorship to eradicate stereotypes that were coming in from Hollywood. And I especially look at the silent film period into early sound. That's my expertise, not so much modern, but the formation of the cinema industry itself. And so the government did these things and provided incentives to filmmakers if they went along with their idealized version of Mexico. So put forward an image of Mexico that's modern, that's wonderful, that's not terrible and uncivilized and unbarbaric like these Hollywood films are showing. Hollywood films, especially in the silent period, the Mexicans primarily were bandits, thieves, robbers. They were bad guys. They were bad, right? And they were seen as uncivilized, and that they needed Americans to come in and kind of save them from themselves. And Mexican officials are trying to rebuild themselves after the war, the Revolutionary War, and this is detrimental to them to have these images. And so they try to use the film industry and say, hey, if you're creating films that make Mexico look wonderful, we'll give you some money for that. We'll give you, so it helped to create more of a brown hero for not just Mexico, it actually took off in most of Latin America. In fact, Cuba, most Cubans would prefer to have watched Spanish language films coming from Mexico that were poorly made than dubbed Hollywood films. They hated dubbing in itself was terrible, but especially in early sound, it was quite awful, especially if you are a native Spanish speaker. And in English, they would try to subtitle stuff with Castilian Spanish. And so it was just kind of a jumbled mix. Right. And they did what you said. They lumped everybody into one box and said, here you go. Whereas Mexico was like, no, we know the nuances of the different cultures in Latin America. We know how to pick out those differences. And we know what themes will resonate with Latin Americans better than Hollywood. And even though they never fully obviously overtook Hollywood, they were still very prominent, and they created a lot of films. In fact, the golden age of film in Mexico is 1930s to 1950s.
Okay. You've lived in a few different places. You taught at Belmont College in Nashville, Tennessee. You also got one of your degrees from Ohio State University, I believe.
Yes.
In Columbus. So you've lived in a few different places. As it relates to this subject, did you notice any key differences in those locations? Things that you took away from and say, yeah, maybe in Columbus this and Nashville this?
Well, yes, I did go to the Ohio State University. We're in Michigan, so I went to.
Okay, all the Wolverines just shut you off. I'm just kidding with you.
Well, I went to U of M for my undergrad, so I'll put a plug in there for.
So who do you root for? Okay, all right. She's on camera. She can tell me when we get off camera. Okay.
But Columbus was great. I found myself with wonderful mentors in the Hispanic community at Ohio State itself. The community also was not as big as Mexican Town, but it was there. And I definitely felt that it could improve. And we were definitely getting many more immigrants from Central America than we had ever before. And so I noticed people trying to, how are we going to integrate them into Columbus? And so that's been an ongoing issue there. And the South, I will say, the politics there didn't quite align with some of the things that I believed in. And DEI education was under attack when I was at Alabama. In fact, the Senate was passing a bill to restrict our talk about slavery.
This is when you lived in Huntsville, Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was at a historically black college.
Alabama A&M. Mm-hmm.
And they wanted me to not talk about slavery. and so that just didn't align with my work. And so coming back to Detroit has been kind of a breath of fresh air, especially with the center and so much support. I have overwhelming support from the community and my academic people. It's wonderful. I love being there.
If I said to you, what's the best way for somebody in Detroit to learn more about your culture, what would you say? Because if you said it to me as an African American, I would say we'll go down to the African American History Museum. That's an easy one. If we're Jewish, they would probably say go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. We don't, to the best of my knowledge, have that museum here in Detroit. There is a national.
Yes.
It's called the National Museum of the American Latino in Washington, D.C. as part of the Smithsonian. Would Detroit be a ripe place to maybe build that? We do have an Arab American National Museum in Dearborn.
I think that we should. I think we should move towards that. But because we don't have one at the moment, the best places I can say for people to go out and enjoy our culture or learn more about it is, of course, the DIA, because they have their exhibit of the ofrendas going on until November 1st. So you can go there, and it's free for Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne County residents. So I encourage people to go see that. If you are someone that doesn't have a lot of time, or maybe you don't do a lot of travel, there are virtual tours of Frida Kahlo's Casa Azul, her blue house in Mexico City, that you can learn. You can go through the virtual tour there. You can do a virtual tour of the Museum of the American Latino. You can watch movies like Coco and Encanto to get some of a feeling of what our celebrations are about, our triumphs, our sadness. You can really embrace that in those movies too. And of course, listening to music and podcasts by Latinos or Hispanic creators.
Great. Well, it sounds great. You've given a wealth of information. We appreciate you sharing it with us during this very important month in our American culture. And we will stay in touch with you. Best of luck with your studies there, both in the history department as well as the Latino American Department Studies, and we'll stay in touch, and good luck with your book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
It's certainly a pleasure. And when we come back, we'll talk about a very important programming note we think you'll be interested in knowing about. We'll be right back. Stay with us. And finally today, a program reminder to tune in to Channel 7 on Monday, October 14th at 7 o'clock p.m. for our 1-hour commercial-free Michigan U.S. Senate debate between Republican Mike Rogers and Democrat Alyssa Slotkin. Join me, Carolyn Clifford, and Alicia Smith for this very important election year forum just a few weeks before voters have to make their choices in the November 5th general election. I'm Chuck Stokes. Have a good week.